I'm seeing quite a bit of those pop up at ranches, and there's really not a lot of knowledge about them out there.
That's Dr. Kelley Neuhold, and what he's referring to are TMR mixers. Now, TMR mixers are not necessarily new in our industry, but as more and more ranchers are picking them up, either used or new, what are some things that we need to know about them? For example, what's the difference between a horizontal and a vertical mixer? Mixing order of your feed sources and why, as well as feed strategies when using them. Today, you might be an outfit that uses one, has used one that's considering it, or an outfit that doesn't want any more machinery on the place. Well, I encourage you to listen in because our conversation is for each of you. But in the event you do have a TMR mixer or considering one,
I think the first thing you do is
find out the answer to that question, along with some very practical conversation on TMR mixers on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Hi, everyone. This is the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills, your host. Thanks for joining us here on our program today. If you're a longtime listener, we want to thank you for tuning in here today. I know there's a couple of ways you can do that. We sure appreciate our radio element that we have to our show. That I know reaches an awful lot of folks, and you can catch that pretty much anywhere in the country. In addition, of course, the other method in today's technology, of course, is through pretty much any podcast provider out there. And if that's the way you're catching it, or if this is the first time you've caught it through a podcast, make sure you click to subscribe and leave us a comment as well. We always appreciate those. Well, before we get into our subject at hand here today, I want to mention for you to stick around later on. Of course, meteorologist Don Day will be in as we take a look at our long-term weather. Kind of looks like we might be seeing a cool down come. He'll explain what that's going to look like here later on for this coming week and into the month of August. And of course, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents. So that's kind of what's in store for today. However, joining us on our program today is Dr. Kelley Neuhold. He's with Westway Feed Products, their Western U.S. Beef and Feedlot Technical Support Manager. And Kelley, thanks for joining us here today on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Justin. I appreciate it.
Well, not often do I get people to respond to my requests on our programs to say, hey, if you got an idea for a show topic, let me know. And that is exactly what you did. And as I had told you before we went on air, you kind of hit me at a good spot because I've been kind of looking at ways of feeding cows in the wintertime, maybe getting into an enterprise where we're feeding cows for other folks. And so you reached out to me in regards to something that you're seeing, and I'll just have you explain it because you do a better job of explaining it.
Well, I guess I reached out to you to talk to you a little bit about TMR mixer wagons. I'm seeing quite a bit of those pop up at ranches, and there's really not a lot of knowledge about them out there. There's a lot of people that think they're going to work for their operation, but they don't necessarily have a good way to at least, or a good idea of how they're going to build a diet and make the TMR work the most successful way they can. And so I thought this might be a good way to get some of that information out there. Some guys that are thinking about it. I know every time I go to a meeting or whatever, I've got one or two guys that say, I'm thinking about putting a TMR in and sure like to do it. So I thought this might be a good way to get out there.
Well, and you're right. I have seen more of those showing up as well. It's kind of hard to think when we're in the dog days of summer here about the wintertime months, but we have to be thinking about that as we move ahead. Because one of the things as we look at these, and we'll get into that. I mean, part of the reason that we're doing that is there's maybe some utilization of some poor feeds that we can utilize in this and mix in with some good concentrates and things like that. And that's really what it's kind of coming down to. The idea behind that is to utilize the feed sources that are available to your operation.
Right. I think, the economists would tell us that feed costs make up 40 to 60% of the cost of a beef production on a ranch. And so we can certainly use a TMR to bring in some of those lower quality forages and mix them with some higher quality forages or some byproducts, whatever's a good buy, and make a quality diet that meets the needs of those cows, and we reduce waste, and we can also not necessarily limit feed them, but feed them the appropriate amount to help reduce waste and get it all consumed. And so that we're making that feed that we have go as far as we can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know, Kelley, that for some folks listening, I kind of push, and we've pushed here on the show quite extensively, that we do want to be low input operators. And when you talk about the percentage that folks put into their cow herd for feed costs, it's a pretty high cost. And if there's ways that we can improve our bottom line and our profit margins, it's by how do we utilize the feed we've got, or how do we utilize the feed that we have at our resources? So I know for some folks, you're thinking about this show, you're thinking, well, you're kind of going against the low input concept. But if you're in an outfit, or you're in a place where maybe you're wanting to background calves or background your own calves or things like this, and I think even some of the things we're going to talk about later on will be useful no matter what kind of operation you are. So first of all, Kelley, let's talk about the different types of mixers, because there's vertical and horizontal. I'll have you explain how those are. You're more familiar with it. We don't have very much machinery, so I'm going to be pretty green when it comes to some of this information. And I know other guys probably way more knowledgeable about machinery than I am, but I'll have you explain it just for the sake of getting everybody on the same page.
Yeah. So there's the horizontal mixer, which is probably used more in a traditional feedlot system. I think they're better apt at mixing high concentrate, high grain diets. I've seen a few of those on ranches, probably ones that, ranches that found a good buy of a cheap used mixer out there. But the majority, I would say, are going to what we call a vertical mixer. They've got one or two, or maybe even a big 3 screws that come up kind of like a blender on a kitchen blender. It comes up and it has knives in there and is able to mix and process the hay, which is nice, so that you don't necessarily have to have somebody come in and grind your hay for you. The mixer will do that. Like I say, most ranches are going to be in that smaller end. There are some big dairies that are going to have some of those big vertical mixers. Typically, dairies will have vertical mixers. I think that's probably where the vertical mixer got its start, was a lot of those dairies. But they've really become handy in these ranches where you can process some hay, get a good process on it, and then add some concentrate, some protein supplement, and a mineral, and then put a good mixed diet out there that those cows can't soar.
Mm-hmm. And so real quick, you've thrown out an acronym of TMR. I know what it means, but just again, we're trying to get everybody on the same base level here. So explain TMR.
Yeah, sorry. It's total mixed diet, TMR. So by total, we mean all of the nutrients that animal needs, all the fiber, the protein, the energy, the vitamins, the trace minerals, a total diet. And we're going to mix it up so well that those cows can't sort through it, or at least shouldn't be able to sort through it. And so then every bite they take is going to be a complete diet for them, and we're going to deliver the nutrients that they need.
Mm-hmm. And you and I had chatted just real briefly, and I want to touch on this just a bit before we went on air. I asked you a little bit about bale processors. Really, we're talking two different concepts. So really not in the same vein in a way. However, the biggest difference would be with the TMR versus what we're seeing with the bale processor. Again, a bale processor, especially the good ones these days, can really work that feed down very, very well and can be fed in a bunk or on the ground. But the biggest difference is when it's fed out, it's going to be layered out. So that's really going to be one of the biggest differences.
Yeah, it is. And South Dakota State University, my PhD professor, John Wagner, did some research back in the early days of feedlot TMRs, and they took and looked at feeding heifers a high forage diet in a feedlot with a TMR, a total mixed ration, versus just layering it in the bunk. And they saw a 10% improvement in average daily gain by mixing the diet, right? So the diet was the same. It was just whether it was layered or whether it was mixed. So those heifers didn't have the ability to sort out. The boss heifers, get the good stuff, and the other heifers get the bad stuff, that kind of stuff. So just by mixing that diet, they saw a 10% improvement in average daily gain. That's pretty big, especially when you're talking $3 5-weight calves. If we can get that kind of improvement either in our backgrounding system, or even putting that body condition score on cows and then getting more cows bred and having healthier calves and that kind of stuff, it can really mean dollars to a ranch.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Kelley, let's take a break here, because it's a good spot to do that, because when we come back, we're going to get more into this in terms of things like, how to feed, what kinds of feed can we be looking, strategies in terms of different groups. If you were to have one of these, how would you break your cattle up? How would that work? What makes sense in doing that? Also, what from a cost perspective, what's the minimum herd size that would need it to justify looking at something like this? We're going to talk about all those things when we return here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. Before we go, this segment today brought to you by Tank Toad, your remote water monitoring system, all from the convenience of your phone, powered by solar, satellite, and cell. It's what we use here on our ranching operation to keep an eye on that cistern tank, because there's nothing worse than running out of water on these hot summer days. Keep an eye on your water supply with a daily text message. Call Meadowlark Solutions today to find out more about their tank monitors, well controllers, generators, and more. Things like even turning your electric fence on and off from a remote location. Give them a call at 801-252-6135 or check them out online by going to their website at tanktoad.com. You know, the other day I was flipping through social media and I see quite a bit of ranch land for sale, and definitely for those in the market, that's a good thing to be able to have access to see what's on the market there. But it got me thinking, what about those ranch families that are on the selling side of that transaction? What I wonder is, did they want to sell? Did they feel like that was the only option? Did they have any other options laid out for them that might allow them to retain that land if they wanted to? Yeah, and I know it's a complicated set of circumstances for each outfit, but here's what I was thinking. Before you do anything, wouldn't you just like to explore some options? Just sit down with someone there at the kitchen table and have some things laid out for you? Well, about 78 years ago, Henry Hall and his son Warren founded Hall Mortgage Company. And since then, they've built a relationship with many ranchers across the country by providing solid and trusting advice, guided, though, by a principle of integrity. Now, today, we know them as Hall and Hall. Nothing's changed, though, with how they work with folks. Yeah, they broker real estate throughout the United States and Canada, and for buyers, they can provide long-term financing. But for either side of that transaction that you might find yourself on, they also offer services above and beyond what the regular brokerage firms offer. And really at the heart of this is that they do want to see land stay in production agriculture, which is why they can help with things like ranch management personnel or assisting with management of day-to-day operations and even drafting leases. Since 1946, Hall & Hall has been dedicated to the land and landowners. And if you're at a point where you'd like to sit down and talk about the future of your land asset or even just brainstorm some options, I encourage you to reach out to the folks at Hall & Hall. You can head to their website at hallandhall.com for more information. Well, as we turn towards our program at hand here today, joining me on the program is Dr. Kelley Neuhold, who is with Westway Feed Products, and we're talking about TMR mixers. In the last segment, we were talking about the difference between vertical and horizontal mixers, and just in general, laying out what Kelley has seen is that these are starting to show up. More ranchers are buying them, but maybe not really an idea of how do they need to be used correctly. And so with that in mind, we thought we'd have a show here today to just kind of visit and talk a little bit about that. Kelley, let's maybe first get into herd size, because one of the things that I talked about in the last segment was I'm about being a low input operator, and I'm always cautious about adding more equipment onto an operation just for the sake of adding new shiny equipment, because new shiny equipment also costs, money to run, to mechanic on, and things like that. So if we're going to do something like this, we have to justify it some way, somehow, economically. So tell me how we would justify that economically.
Yeah. So there's really not a lot of good data out there from the universities or anything, that compare a TMR system to any other type of system. Kenny Ing put some money out in the Kenny Ing Foundation, and they did some dry lot versus, grazing and that kind of system, but not really a TMR versus a non-TMR system, so it's kind of hard to get some numbers. But what I've looked at is probably most cases, you're going to need at least 70 cows to probably justify a mixer. I think, today, used mixers to new mixers for a small operation, you're talking somewhere between $15,000 and $40,000 to get started. And so, if you had 50 cows and your TMR mixer cost you $25,000 and you fed for 120 days over 10 years, that'd be 42 cents. That's a pretty big jump, but if you've got 100 cows, that reduces down to 21 cents a day. And we can certainly, I think, make up for that with saved feed cost, reduced feed costs, and improvement and performance of those cows. So I think somewhere in there at that 70, 75 cows is probably where you need to be if you're going to justify a mixer. Now, if you're going to feed your calves, background your calves, do that kind of stuff, we can obviously get, fewer cows. And I think that's part of the reason why like dairies and feedlots were more accepting of this technology, right? Because, most cattle are fed in feedlots that are 1,000 heads, so you can spread that mixer cost out over more animals. I think the average size of a dairy herd today is like 337 cows. So, they're spreading that mixer cost out over a lot more head than the typical rancher. I think, what is it, like 55% of ranches today have 22 or less cows. So it's kind of hard for those smaller ranchers to justify a mixer. But I think if you get up to that 75 to 100 head cows, it sure could be advantageous to look at a mixer.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, Kelley, don't you think it also has to do with maybe even your location and even the type of operation that you are? I would think that if I was back maybe a little bit closer to higher feed proteins, if I was closer to eastern Nebraska or something like that, and I have access to some distillers and those kinds of products that are out there, there's a lot of things that need to go into this. I don't think it's necessarily for everybody, but it sure is some options.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and you're spot on. I see a lot of these mixers going in Nebraska, eastern Kansas, eastern Oklahoma, those kind of spots where they're going to have lots of byproducts and the availability of byproducts, distillers, corn gluten, cotton byproducts, and those kind of things, and especially where those are cheap compared to, a forage source. Mm-hmm. The nice thing is, though, right now, with the price of calves going up and the price of feed coming down, a TMR or something like that I think you can justify it a little easier because we can add some performance without adding a lot of cost in the feed.
Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, Kelley, and I hate to put everybody in my kind of an outfit because we're a range outfit and we try to stay on grass as long as we can through the wintertime and have the hay as a backup for those storms. So I see some range guys probably looking at this and say, okay, it's maybe not an option for them. And we're going to talk about one reason why here in a little bit. It'll be in the next thing we talk about. However, even if you're a range guy, you might decide to background calves. That's where I probably see the range guys finding application with something like this.
Yeah, I agree, Justin. I mean, like I said, that work out of South Dakota State showed a 10% increase in gain by having a TMR. If you can background those calves with a TMR and get an extra tenth or 2/10 of a pound of gain because you put out a high quality mixed ration for those calves and they weren't able to sort it, you can pay for a mixer pretty quick. And then you have your mixer to be able to supplement your cows too. Because I think Nebraska and the University of Arkansas looked at using TMRs for supplementing cows out in a range system. You can either feed it out on the ground or, use tires or even put up a hot wire fence and kind of feed along the fence to use as a bunk system to keep those cows from laying and stepping and defecating on the feed and get a good quality TMR as opposed to feeding those cows just to supplement. And I think we can keep better body condition score on those cows and get them to perform a little better for us.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, how to feed it, because I think that is one of the things that's the second part of the range guy subject that I wanted to talk about. I referenced just a moment ago, because I think for folks maybe more in the Midwest, the farmer feeder type guys, some of those guys might be a little more set up with some bunk situations. Because, I mean, as we all know, buying bunks is very expensive.
Yeah.
and
Concrete's not cheap.
Yeah. Yep. And so whether you're going concrete bunks or whether you want to go good heavy metal bunks, because I can tell you the cheap ones will not last. So you're going to need something that's going to hold up. And so let's talk about how to feed this and what you found and how that's working.
Yeah, I think we can certainly feed a TMR out on the ground. I think some stuff I found on the internet, like J-Lore has some information on their website. They're a TMR mixer wagon. They said, feeding in a bunk as compared to feeding on the ground, they see about a 30% improvement in feed waste, so you're going to waste a lot less feed. I saw an article in the Angus Journal where a ranch said they had looked at theirs feeding a TMR on the ground versus putting it in a bunk, and they had about 20% feed waste. So bunks are not cheap, and it's certainly not fun buying them and doing that kind of thing, but you can save a lot of money. And when you're thinking about feed cost is 40 to 60% cost of your ranch, you can spend a little bit on bunks and make up a lot of money in that feed cost. But like I said, there's some other things, we can use a hot wire fence or, even a good solid fence. My dad uses some of that continuous panels and feeds on the other side of the continuous panels. The cows can get their heads through and push on that panel and feed through without having to have a bunk, and that reduces waste because those cows aren't in there, stepping on it, pooping on it, laying on it, and that kind of stuff. So anything we can do to keep those cows from, rubbing that feed in the dirt will definitely improve it. And whether that be a TMR or simply feeding hay out that way, we can certainly save a lot of hay cost.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point because that's relevant however you feed it, whether you're on with a bale bed or processor or a TMR. That's for sure. All right, Kelley, let's take another break here. And when we come back, I want to start getting into really some of the things I know that you wanted to talk about, and that is really giving some instructions as far as here's how they work. Here's what you should be doing or need to be thinking about in terms of mixing order and mixing times, and what kind of feeds to be looking at and strategies to feed. So we're going to talk about that when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show. This segment today brought to you by the American Gelbvieh Association. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics. Find out more by going to their website at gelbvieh.org.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer-influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer-influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics.
Well, I know for the last several weeks you've been hearing me talk a little bit about Cowpuncher Coffee, and as we come out of break here, I have their website pulled up in front of me, and we'll talk about some of the stuff that I'm seeing just from their website. But, Jim and Trish Williams, it's a family operation, not only their ranching operation, but their coffee business as well. And we want to support those types of entities. We all do. But just on the merits of the brand or the quality of their coffee, if you've been looking at maybe switching out or looking at some different varieties you want to try, I would encourage you to go to their website at cowpunchercoffee.com. Check out all of the different varieties that they have. For me, I kind of like a stronger blend, and I like to do the grind myself. There's a lot of different options you can look at. Also, for those that like kind of the K-Cup type of coffee, they've got those options as well. So check it out online. Go to their website at cowpunchercoffee.com, or you can give them a call, find a phone number there. Give Jim or Trish Williams a call as well. It's what we drink here on the X-Ring Ranch and at the Working Ranch Radio Show studios. Grab a mug and let's spur the day with Cowpuncher Coffee. Well, as we continue on with our program here today, joining us is Dr. Kelley Neuhold with Westway Feed Products. He is their Western U.S. Beef and Feedlot Technical Support Manager. And Kelley, as we are talking about this whole element of TMR, I think we've had really good discussion, mainly just with folks that from a lot of different kinds and scopes of operation and how just informational that they can look at this. I know when you originally reached out to me, as you had shared in the first segment, that you see these items or these units showing up on ranches, and maybe not everybody's quite familiar with how to use them. They understand the idea, just throw in feed and see, voila, and out comes a mixed product. But there is maybe a little bit more to that. So let's start into that right now. And so let's just say, for example, you go to town, you buy one on an auction used, and you're home with it. Now what?
Yeah. So I think the first thing you do is figure out what your diet's going to be, right? What's it going to consist of? Most of these guys will have some kind of forage base. They may have a good hay and a really poor hay. We need to get those hays sampled. Probably sample 10% of those hays, get them sent in, figure out what hays we have, because we spent the time and the money to get this TMR wagon. Let's make sure that we're putting out a truly balanced diet. And so then find, whether it be wet distillers or dry distillers, some kind of protein source, cottonseed meal, whatever that's going to be. And then a good supplement. Obviously, I like a liquid supplement. It'll bring in some condition and some palatability to those rations, but figuring out what our feedstuffs are and how we're going to use them. Typically in the U.S., we're going to be spring calving herds. So when we're using our TMR wagon, we're going to be feeding end of second trimester, all through the third trimester. So, how do we put those forages in this diet? Do we start with the lower quality forages and then go to the higher quality forages? Do we blend the forages the whole time and then use the concentrate as the protein source to increase the energy of the diet to meet the cow's needs? And so those kind of things. I think the other thing we need to figure out is, are we going to feed one ration or are we going to feed multiple rations? Most ranches at least have their yearling heifers, their growing heifers set apart from their mature cows and that kind of stuff. We can make one ration that meets everything and then feed it to the bigger cows and full feed to the younger cows. And then, we may have to supplement with some pre-choice hay or something like that. But there's certainly different strategies to build those rations, but we want to think about what ration we're going to make and what feedstuffs we have.
Mm-hmm. So Kelley, one of the things, and you mentioned that, was about touching base with a nutritionist that can help you get along there. Are there other options? I mean, I'm not saying you wouldn't want to touch base with a nutritionist. I think that's a good way to get started. But as you get more comfortable with some of this, are there some apps or some useful tools that can be used in formulating and kind of developing these rations based upon your feed sources that you have?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, to me, the best way is to contact somebody that's been out there and done it, right? Most feed companies like Westway have nutritionists. We have several nutritionists on staff that would be happy to do that. We can build the ration, and then we can also build what we call batch sheets. So they would show, if you're going to make 1,000 pounds, how much hay do you need to have to put in, how much silage, how much liquid feed, that kind of thing. But yeah, there are some calculators. I believe Oklahoma State has a pretty nice one out there that's Excel based, and you kind of put in your feedstuffs, and they have a feedstuff library, and put in your cow information, and you can certainly do that. And then, obviously extension agents and the universities are out there, and they can typically do this kind of stuff too. So there's lots of ways to get it done.
Yeah. And that was actually the one I was thinking about too. I found that I used that last winter, and I actually felt like that the OSU ration calculator was quite handy to use. You can go in and you really can customize it to your own operation. So, but like you said, I think for me, the first start is, and I've always done that, is I contact a nutritionist first, and then I kind of get a basis to get started with that. And then I can, we can do some adaptions on my own, but I think it would be good from that standpoint, because there's some things that they know that I don't, because that's not what I went to school for.
Yep. Well, and I think one of the things I bring too is I typically, in the areas I work, I know some of the feedstuffs that are a good buy or not a good buy, and may be close. And so I think I at least try to help our producers in that way of figuring out what feeds we can feed and what feeds we should feed, So I think that's another thing that a professional should bring to his customers.
Mm-hmm. All right. So Kelley, then let's also get a little further into this, and because it's all part of this, as how do we work these units? And so one of the things we had talked about when we were setting this show up is you'd mentioned mix times, and even the order that you put some of that stuff in those mixers. So I'll have you expand on that.
Yeah, it's crucial to making a high quality diet, right? The longer we mix it, the more we're going to degrade the particle size, make it smaller. So we don't want to mix it too long, but we certainly want to make sure that we're getting a good mix. And the owner's manual or whoever sold you the mixer should be able to give you some specifics for that mixer type. But typically we want to mix these for, we're talking 3 to 10 minutes. We're not mixing them a real long time. We just want to make sure the mixer does its time. And we want to make sure our RPMs and all that are where they need to be for that time period so that we get a good mix. But we certainly want to make sure that we get a good mix on the feed without reducing particle size too much, right? Mm-hmm. The other thing is we want to make sure that we're putting in the ingredients in a proper order. If we don't get the proper order, then we're not going to get a quality mix. A lot of people, like with our liquid feeds, they'll want to put them in last. And if you put them in last in a high forage diet, you'll get the liquid feed to make what we'd call turkey balls. It'll ball up that forage, and then we don't get a good dispersion of the liquid throughout the batch. So typically what I like to start with is the concentrates. So if we're putting any grain, any dried distillers, anything like that, we're going to put that in first. And then we're going to put in our liquids if we're putting in a liquid feed, and then our dry forages. And then we'll put in any wet forages or wet distillers or something like that that'll help push those dry forages down and make the ration condition. One thing, may not know what I'm talking about with condition, and condition is just making the ration kind of wet and palatable. That's one thing we certainly want to look at. If our ration is too dry when we put it out, it's going to blow away and it's not going to be as palatable. And if it's too wet, the cattle won't be able to eat enough, right? And so that just the water, the amount of feed they're going to have to consume to make up for that water is just going to be too great. So a rule of thumb, I want to be as somewhere between a 65% dry matter to a 50% dry matter. That makes a really good ration. We want to have some wet feeds in there that make it highly palatable and really condition that ration and keep it from blowing out of the feed bunk.
Yeah. Well, and that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it on these TMRs from that perspective, the idea of having a base in there that's fairly wet. I guess I didn't realize that. I know, cattle like that wet feed just in general. I mean, you feed them silage and they like that. Yep. And so you add that wet feed in there. I didn't realize how important that was. In addition, I think with that too, it's also putting water in their diet so they're not having to hit the water tanks as hard as they would on a dry feed.
Yep, for sure. And we can do that by simply adding water to the ration. A garden hose on these TMRs isn't probably the best because it takes quite a while for a garden hose to put in the pounds you're going to need. But I certainly do know of operations that have a water tank and the ability to add a little water to give them that condition. And it's a cheap way to add that condition. And I think liquid feed and some other things do a little better job. But if you've got a dry diet and your only option is water, it's certainly an acceptable way.
Yeah. All right. Well, Kelley, let's take another break here. And when we come back, I want to get into more of the strategies to feed the different contemporary groups you might have on your ranch operation, whether it's young cows, middle-aged cows, old cows, or running-age cows, however you want to break that up to your young cows or your young calves. Strategies on feeding that. You touched on that a little bit ago. I want to go expand in that just a little bit more when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
This year, choose to unlock the full potential of your cattle operation with Kelley Irrigation, the affordable and dynamic solution for grass-based livestock operations. Beat drought by planning ahead with the most user-friendly irrigation system. Kelley systems ensure optimal water distribution across all acres and are unencumbered by obstacles such as fence lines or steep terrain. Don't miss out on untapped pasture potential. Choose Kelley to secure the future of your grazing operation. For more information, visit our website at www.k-linena.com. Be sure to fill out a consultation form so our designers can create an estimate for your project. Kelley Irrigation, for greener, more productive pastures anywhere.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Dr. Kelley Neuhold with Westway Feed Products is my guest here today. We're talking about TMR mixers, and I think that we've had good discussions so far just in terms of defining what they can do, where their usefulness can be on an operation, whether it fits or your operation or not. That's up for you to decide. But as we look and kind of wrapping up our conversation here today, we're going to get into strategies and different ways of feeding and contemporary groups you can look at. But as at break, Kelley mentioned to me, he says, we probably better mention about removing the twine. And there's some pretty fancy pieces of equipment if you're loading these things up that can pull some of that twine or net wrap off. But that is a pretty important part.
Yeah, not only for the safety and health of the cattle and your environment and not getting that twine out there. But, these mixer wagons will certainly get it in the joints and the bearings and that kind of stuff. And you can tear up a piece of equipment pretty quick with some twine or that. So it's really a good idea. Not to say if you miss a few or whatever that it's going to hurt anything, but it's always a good idea to remove twine or that bale wrap and make sure those stay out of the mixer.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's jump into the strategies to feeding with this, and I'll just I'm going to throw it out there that way because I know there's a lot of different directions and topics under that umbrella that we'll talk about.
Yeah, I think depending on your operation, the strategies can vary, a lot. If you're a small operation, you may want to only feed one diet because you may not have enough animals to feed multiple diets. And in those circumstances, what I typically do is make one diet, and I make it for the animals that have the highest requirements. And then I help the producer figure out how to limit feed that for the other animals. And if it's too high, say I got that diet ready for some 5-weight calves, and we're going to feed it to the cows, then we may have to free choice some hay or something to those older cows, use that diet to deliver the nutrients, but then fill them up with some corn stalks or some cheap, low quality forage that they can go ahead and eat on. If we're a bigger ranch and we've got several different groups and we can feed those older cows one diet, and certainly those younger cows, I think something a lot of producers tend to forget is those 2 to 3 year old cows may still have a growth requirement. And so not only are they trying to lactate and they're trying to get bred, but they're also still trying to grow. And so formulating a diet for them and making sure we get good nutrients into them is going to help us to get them rebred and keep those cows in the system. And then not only get them rebred, but get them bred back sooner, right? So that, because we know those young cows that breed sooner in the breeding system are going to remain in the herd longer. And that's also going to help us put more money in the pocket of the ranch, right? If we can keep those cows in the herd longer, and then feeding those young calves and then being able to background our calves, and we may even want to sort off our replacement heifers from our steers and the heifers that we're going to sell and feed them differently. I think those are always a good strategy. One thing about feeding, especially older cows, is they can eat you out of house and home. And so with these mixer wagons, they're going to have a scale system on them. And so knowing how much we're putting out there for those cows and limit feeding them and not giving them ad libitum access is a good way too, especially if we've got a high quality TMR that we know is going to meet the needs of those cows. We can give those cows as much or as little as we think they need, and then manage that diet that way, and that's going to help control our feed costs, because if we just give them as much as they're going to want, they will certainly eat a lot, and it may not add to their performance. So I think those would be some strategies. The other thing, like we talked about a little bit, about whether feeding on a bunk or even feeding, like a semi-confinement where the cows have access to maybe some stalks or some dry pasture, and then also being able to feed them as well, I think is a good strategy so those cows can get out, especially if we're calving, right? Getting those cows out of the dry lot and into a pasture where they can have a little more access, a little cleaner place for them to have their calves, and we'll have a little less scours and that kind of thing. The other nice thing about a TMR is we can look at introducing some of those other feed additives like an ionophore. Rumensin's probably the most common one we use out there in cow diets, and certainly can be used in cow diets. And I think some of their best data is in cow diets. And so we can improve efficiency. We can get some coccidiosis control. And so I think adding an ionophore or some other things like that is certainly an advantage that we should consider when feeding a TMR.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you hit a lot of good points in that question there, because as you were talking, I mean, from starting with the nutrition importance on those younger growing cows, 2 to 3 year olds, and how that spreads into longevity, which is a major issue. I think the lack of longevity in a cow herd is one of our biggest expenses. So you hit a lot of key points in that answer there. Dr. Neuhold, as we kind of wrap up our conversation here today, I think we've explained really what it is, what a TMR mixer is. I know, as I said before, it's not necessarily going to be for every operation, and that's fine. But I think it's for some, it might just be something, well, you've seen them around. I have. Shoot, I've driven down the road and see a neighbor with one. And I thought, in fact, one time I stopped in there and just watched how they were doing it, just for the fun of it, and quite interesting. But I think as folks are looking at this, and times change, maybe you have readily access to lower cost feed, and if you do, maybe there's some different enterprises you want to come in, and that's where something like this would fit. So as we kind of wrap up our conversation, just some final thoughts from you about this.
Yeah, I think it's a great fit for a lot of operations. I do think there's certainly some operations that it's not a fit at all. We talked about some of those smaller operations. I think, you may look at you and a neighbor going in, because a lot of those smaller operations are in places where you can get these byproducts and that kind of stuff. And I think right now, especially feed costs and corn are coming down. And in a lot of places, forages are still pretty tight. And so we can spread out those forages that are cheap on the operation by adding some of these cheaper, low cost byproducts by a TMR and getting better performance out of our livestock.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So Kelley, as our subject here today was looking at just the usefulness and how you would apply using a TMR mixer and some of the things to be thinking about in that. Should people have more questions about that, how could they get a hold of you?
Yeah, they can certainly go to our website, Westway Feed Products. And I think my phone number and my email are on there. And I'm also on LinkedIn, just Kelley Neuhold. Find me there.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us here today. Appreciate you reaching out to me about this. I think it hit at a relevant time with a lot of folks beginning to make plans for not just this winter, Kelley. I think they're making plans for 2 years and 3 years out, don't you think?
Yes, sir. Yep.
And that's really what this is about. I mean, this is an item that's not a one and done kind of a thing. This is something that you're buying because you're maybe looking at a different direction with your operation.
Yes, sir.
Yep.
I appreciate you having me. I enjoyed it.
You bet. And thanks for being here again. Dr. Kelley Neuhold with Westway Feed Products joining us here on the program today as we explore and just talk a little bit about this TMR mixer element that's out there. Definitely, they have been around for a while. So I know for some of you, it's maybe old hat what we talked about. But for other folks, it might be something you could be entertaining. And I think the conversation we had today has some practicality to that. As we said earlier, it may not be for everyone, and that's fine. But maybe you're looking at some different enterprise mixes, and there's ways that you can utilize those feed sources in a way that would allow those cattle to be efficient with the feed that they got in front of them. And so just some real good practical dialogue here today with Kelley on that, and I appreciate him joining us. Stay with us. When we come back, the Captain Tim O'Byrne will be in for this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and meteorologist Don Day in with a look at what he's telling me is a bit cooler, at least for some of us, long-term weather forecast.
Fascinated by our wild weather? Now you can learn, appreciate, and understand the weather in your own backyard with the new Tropo Rain Gauge. Having achieved the highest rating of any product reviewed by the weatherstationexperts.com, the Tropo boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY, that's RAINDAY, for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Working Ranch Cow Country today. Hope your August is off to a great start. You're playing safe out there. Justin, we do this once a year, generally, or a couple times a year, but it's just a heartfelt all-around shout-out to those amazing folks that are there for us in the rural communities when there's a fire or a disaster, a flood, down trees, power lines out, everything. We rely on you people so much, and we appreciate every single thing that you do for us. You're out there on long shifts, crappy weather, challenging situations, doing the very best you can to make sure that our rural communities are protected and we're able to function and carry on. It just really warms my heart to know that this country has an infrastructure like you folks that are caring and actually great Americans. You want the rural communities to be protected, and you do a great job of it. We just can't thank you enough. So hats off to everybody out there, EMS, fire, everybody, the utilities, the road crews, everybody, Sheriff's Department. We love you folks. Thank you so much from the bottom of our hearts.
right, thanks, Captain. And yeah, a big thank you and a salute to all of our emergency personnel, those that are working a lot of extra time hours. It's all over the country. You can go to I'm sure that you even know of a website you can go to. It shows you where all of the fires are across the United States and Canada. Everybody is on extra duty this time of the year. It makes it pretty long. In fact, about a week ago, we ourselves had a little incident where we had a storm go through on a Sunday night, a lot of lightning with it, and there was a lot of rain that followed it up. However, the next day, with a little wind and things getting dried out with this heat, sure enough, the smoke came up and everybody took off trying to find where the fire was at, and some concern about how close it was to our little town of Upton. But nevertheless, as we got out there to it, finally, when it got close enough, I was able to put my drone up and get out over the top of it, shoot some pictures, send them back to the county fire warden, and get a GPS coordinate so we could get a better location on it and know the best route to get to it. And between two counties that kind of converged on that fire, and a lot of ranchers and volunteer fire department, we were able to get it contained really quickly and really save something that could have been quite concerning had there not been fast reaction, as we see in so many places across the country. So again, a big thank you to our emergency personnel, our firefighters. You know, many of these are volunteer firefighters, and whether it's coming out of cities that are close to rural areas or it's ranchers just having a wet unit on their rig, on their own pickup, that they can get out and get to a fire quickly. Or in my instance, the county gives me a fire truck that allows me to go out and get to these fires quickly. And so on behalf of all of us here in rural areas, we sure appreciate all of the neighborly support that we get from our neighbors, our fellow ranchers, and our local communities that help us out when these fires strike. Now, a side note here, just totally off reference here of what we were talking about before, but I had mentioned that I had used my drone to go and locate this fire. Now, in some cases where you're the first one on the fire and there's no air support, check with your county warden, those kinds of things. It's probably okay to do that. However, if you know that air support is going to be coming into that fire, do not put your drone in the air or get it grounded as soon as you can. That is the first thing that will shut down that air support on a fire, is having drones in the air. So do not do that. And I just throw that out there because sometimes for some folks, they get a little antsy and want to get in and be on the know on everything and use their drones inappropriately. And for myself, I want to continue to have the access and use of a drone, so I do not want to abuse it. So I just kind of throw that out as a cautionary tidbit there. Well, let's switch directions a bit here and turn towards our weather, as meteorologist Don Day joins us, as he does each and every week, with a look at our long-term weather. And Don, I'll tell you, I know not every part of the country has been this way, but it sure has been for the western half of the U.S., just really hot and quite dry. And with that in mind, it sounds like as we're here in the month of August and moving and looking ahead, now this coming week definitely sees a little reprieve from that. But just in general, you kind of made us some comments before we went on air that we could be seeing a cool down coming for August.
Yeah, so interesting weather patterns going to unfold over the next couple of weeks. First of all, out in the western states, there is some help on the way, especially where fire activity has really picked up. We're going to see another good plume of subtropical moisture, probably the biggest one of the year, come up out of Mexico into the southwestern United States, then curve around a big area of high pressure in the nation's midsection. So the Intermountain West and parts of the Western Plains will have an increase in chance of shower and thunderstorm activity. And it's one of these situations where not everyone's going to get a lot of rain, but a lot of areas that need rain should get some, and it should help out with the fire situation. Then we're going to see tropical activity picking up. It's been quite a little bit of a break between Hurricane Beryl and what we're seeing now forming in the Gulf of Mexico and near the Florida coast. There's going to be a couple of tropical systems that could affect the southeast United States there, the Carolinas, maybe the mid-Atlantic. And then swooping in behind that may be a push of cooler air. Right around, let's say, after August 8th through the 15th, we may see temperatures go below average in the heart of the Midwest and Corn Belt. Now, that will likely push the real hot weather more along the West Coast, while the nation's middle cools off a little bit. So there's going to be some weather coming here over the next couple of weeks, whether it's rain returning to the west, the cool down in the Midwest, or the tropical weather in the southeast.
Mm-hmm. What's kind of the dividing line for that when you say maybe the middle of the month we're going to see in the Midwest cooler than average temperatures? What's that dividing line east and mainly on the west side of that?
Well, it looks like it's going to be from let's say the eastern side of the Dakotas through the upper Midwest and Great Lakes looks to be the areas. The further western extent could be, let's say the Missouri Valley, those areas. So that would split the Dakotas in half. Those are the areas that are likely at points east to be the coolest. But occasionally when you have these cool downs like this, they'll get to the east slopes of the Rockies. But west of the divide, that colder air won't get over the hump there.
Mm-hmm. All right. So you talked a little bit about hurricane activity. So we've covered that. Anything else as far as, from a further out standpoint? I know a few weeks ago we touched a little bit on temperatures in the Pacific. Anything along those lines that's new or modified information from when we talked last?
Not at the moment. Where we are right now, we're at the most mature part of summer. And in a couple of weeks, I hate to say this, but in a couple of weeks, we'll start looking at some of those early fall indicators and whether or not fall will be off to an early start or not. And we will be paying very close attention to what's going on with La Nina and those water temperatures up in the North Pacific. But we're about 2 or 3 weeks away from that. Certainly, this is the time of year. We call these the dog days of summer, can be some of the hottest times of the year for a lot of the U.S., and we'll see that before we see this cooler weather come mid-month.
Mm-hmm. All right, real quick, one more thing, and you'd mentioned it a little bit ago, that in this coming week to see one more push from some of that moisture that comes up out of Mexico. Is this kind of the last hoorah for the monsoon?
It could be. It could be. Now, usually you get 2 or 3 of these in August. So this will be the first one. There might be another 1 or 2, but probably not as strong. Mm-hmm. That's why I think next week is going to be really important for a lot of folks and able to maybe pick up some decent summer precipitation before we actually start to dry out.
You bet. All right. Well, Don, thanks for joining us here. Appreciate the update.
Thank you.
And you can catch meteorologist Don Day each and every morning by going to his YouTube channel. You can find a link there if you go to his website at dayweather.com, and there is a link to get into his YouTube channel. If you subscribe to that, it'll show up on your YouTube every morning, which is pretty handy, especially this time of the year when we're just kind of wanting to know where things are at. Pretty much any time of the year, if we're in agriculture, we're really watching weather at any point in time. So check it out for yourself. Also, if you're on his website, he's got weather stations, rain gauges, various things like that. Check those out as well by going to his website. Again, that is dayweather.com. Stick around. After the break, I'll tell you what we're working on for upcoming editions of the Working Ranch Radio Show after this. Well, they're getting close to wrapping things up for the next issue of Working Ranch Magazine, which, by the way, is the September issue. And if you do not have a subscription, it's pretty easy to get started. You can go to workingranchmag.com and you can start your subscription from there. And I'll tell you, this is one of the classiest, most informational publications there is out there in our industry today. I'd encourage you to take a look. Again, go to their website at workingranchmag.com. Also, check them out on social media as well. Make sure you reply to the captain every Friday morning when he wants to know what's going on out there across the country. Well, here's what we're working on for upcoming editions of the Working Ranch Radio Show. We're going to go back to June of this year when Congresswoman Harriet Hagerman, she's out of Wyoming, her and 14 other co-sponsors introduced a bill that would overturn the Biden administration's new rule on mandatory animal identification. I'd like to explore that a little bit and have that conversation, so that'll be on an upcoming show. In addition, back in April of this past year, we had a show where we talked about a few different products. Not to sell them, I just had questions as a rancher. One was 701X. The other one was Fairpiece. You can go back and listen if you want to find out more about them. We're going to do that again. One's going to be on trail cams for monitoring stock tanks. The other one is going to be on pregnancy blood tests. So stick around for those shows that will be coming up here on later editions of the Working Ranch Radio Show. Now, if you'd like to get a hold of me, it's pretty simple. You can send me an email at justin.workingranch@gmail.com. The Working Ranch Radio Show is a production of Working Ranch Magazine, branded #1 by America's Ranchers. Thanks again for joining us. Be sure to join us the same time, same place next week or on your favorite podcast provider. I'm Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.